Good evening. This is a video I've had planned for just a little bit in a few days because I'm in therapy now. you know. I'm learning about all of these different coping skills and values and all this stuff. And if you haven't joined my XMPP, there's a guy on there who said, if you're having trouble with wanting to stay alive, you should find something that matches your values. You should find a value and become like an activist of some sort. And that got me thinking, because obviously Linux is a big interest of mine. I always think about why I transitioned to from like using Windows to Linux on a PC, right? And kind of what set that off. And I kind of wanted to, I don't want to go down the entire rabbit hole again, but I want to explain some things because a lot of people right now are starting their own transition. They're trying to switch from Windows to Linux as well. And what's happening is they don't really people are becoming evangelists, but they haven't really convinced people why they need to switch. We just kind of have it in our heads that Microsoft bad, Linux good. So uh, you know that's all the reason you need, right? But I'm here to kind of contend with that and say that switching your operating system, like becoming a free software evangelist, is not a 1 day process because what you really need, right? You need a reason to do something. So I'm gonna draw a few analogies here, but we're going to think for a second that your values are things that if I told you, right, you have to stand in this really shitty smelling porta potty for an hour, right? That's the scenario you want to think of. That's the situation you're in. And you can think of Windows as that shitty situation. We're going to compare it to something else in a bit, so don't get too attached to it. But basically, if you're using Windows, you are standing in the porta potty for an hour, you know, and your value is when I ask you, do you want to stand in this porta potty for an hour? You would say fuck no. But you might also follow it up with, if you pay me $1 million, I'll do it, or $100 or whatever the fuck number you want. And that $100 or $1 million or whatever is your value. That is your reason to do something. So when you're um when you're thinking about this, I'm stuck on Windows. I hate Windows. Windows sucks. I need a reason to switch. There's gonna be different reasons why people switch over to Linux. You need a motivator because as people, you'll notice this if, like, for instance, I'm having trouble finishing this book just because I'm distracted by my computer, but I'm trying to read Permanent Record by Edward Snowden, and I'm like so close to being done, and I was getting close because I was on an airplane. And I brought the book with me and I got through most of it. Now I just need to finish it, but I can't even like read a couple of pages without just getting distracted and looking at my phone or something. So what happens is after about 2 days of that go by where you just haven't opened the book, what happens is your body loses motivation, you lose inertia. And so when we're thinking about a reason to do something, you need to give yourself that inertia in order to push yourself forward. So for switching to Linux, because here's another analogy I'm going to make is you find yourself addicted to some sort of substance, whether it be alcohol or meth or weed or whatever the fuck you're into. When you're an addict, you always have a reason to do something, whether it helps you with pain or it, is an avoidance thing and you're trying to avoid trauma or whatever it is, you're going to, as you switch over to Linux, you are going to find reasons to stay on Windows. Because when you're so accustomed to something, that's what we talk about when we talk about familiarity, is you have trapped your brain basically into thinking this is how I run my computer. I run Windows and it loads my programs. And you need a reason to stop. So like the drug addict, if you can't just tell somebody, quit smoking, you know? You can't shame them into quit smoking. Maybe you can, but really what's going to happen is they will tell you that smoking helps with whatever problem they have. They have some sort of pain, and smoking helps alleviate that pain a bit. So unless you can give them an alternative, they aren't going to really want to switch. They aren't going to want to quit smoking because what the fuck am I supposed to do for my pain instead, you know? So what you have now is you have a Windows user who is so accustomed to using Windows, they find that it's not a very healthy habit. They don't want to stay on it anymore, but they don't really want to switch to Linux, because all it is an alternative operating system that's just going to make their life inconvenient for a while. And so we need to give people reasons to switch, basically. And that's one of the first things you need to convince somebody of. It's not that Windows sucks, but you need to tell them that there is a healthier alternative, a more ethical alternative. And you can link them all those videos about people switching to Linux or whatever, where people just get tired of these fucking big tech relationships. And what your reason is going to depend, from person to person, but it is effectively a mindset shift. And so when we're thinking about this, you need to when you're telling your friends, about trying to switch their operating system, it's not going to be a 1 day process. Even if you can convince them, like, okay, well, let's switch you over to Linux. That's why I always recommend people get a second SSD, and they put Linux on the second SSD because part of what you're trapped in is Windows loads all your programs. Windows itself isn't really all that important. It's that all your programs are made for Windows. And so what you need to do is, that's what I did, was I said, okay, I'm going to keep Windows and I'm going to install Linux on the second drive. And what I'm going to do is, as I'm using Linux, I'm going to start finding these alternatives to Windows software. And I'm going to install them on Windows because a lot of these are cross-platform. So eventually what happened was, it became longer and longer before I opened up Windows because suddenly, over time, all of my programs had switched over to Linux. Linux programs, free software ones. And so I just found myself not booting into Windows anymore, and that's how a lot of people end up doing it, is they start with the dual boot and then they slowly move off of it, and then eventually their entire system just runs Linux and you don't need the dual boot anymore. And that's why I say that it's important that we have gaming on a Linux computer, because a lot of these people, like, if you're a professional, your reason is, I'm stuck in this porta potty because I am being paid $100. I'm using FL Studio and I'm making music and I'm doing record deals and all this other stuff. We're not really talking about you. Your reason for using Windows is, you have lost your freedom a long time ago. And it's because you need money. Your computer's used for money. So how do you get somebody to to leave their shitty situation, where they're like us, where we don't really use our computers for professional work, where you mostly just use them as a hobby or as for fun, entertainment, whatever, checking your email, that kind of thing, whatever it is you need to do with a computer, basic stuff. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk a bit about today, is just getting in that mindset, because the more I think about it, I'm like, how am I going to convince somebody that that they need to just uproot their entire lives online and just switch, And it really is that analogy, is you get stuck in this trap where Windows is familiar, Windows is comfortable, and so it's very hard to make a switch from it because they make it very inconvenient to do so. Where a lot of your software isn't going to run, like, I know that, again, as Linux users, we probably don't think about this because our desktops aren't full of a million different icons. Windows users don't really have that. The culture around Windows software is maybe free as in price, but not free as in freedom. So you have a lot of freeware that that they need to basically get rid of and switch to a false alternative. And that's really the mindset switch you need to have is I want to stop using freeware. I want to start using FOSS. You know, I need software that respects my freedom so that I can use whatever operating system I want, and I'm free to redistribute the software on my OS. So that's kind of what I want you to think about today is if you're if the like my audience really isn't trying to make this transition, but you may have thought about this before. If you're telling your friend, kind of the give them the reason that they need to switch, not just a name and shame kind of thing, but you need to effectively convince them on a subconscious level that that proprietary software in general is bad for them. Like they may not believe you at first, but the longer you use free software, the the more you start to appreciate what it does for you, and that you kind of wish other people would do it too. That they would abandon this horrible software that is full of AI coding and bugs and all this other shit. And move over to the more ethical alternative. And that's kind of the focal point of this is just finding that inertia and having them make the first step. Because if you don't actually practice it, if you end up just using Windows, but you're like, oh, I want to try Linux, you never will. It just won't happen because it's too much work, it's too much research. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. Thanks.